The sky above Dewberry Street always looked like it hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. Grayish, with smudges of sun poking through, like someone had half-wiped a window with a greasy cloth. The buildings were tired, cracked paint curled like dry leaves, windows stuck in place, and walls that sighed when the wind passed. It smelled like wet socks, frying oil, and last week's regrets. 8-year-old Zadie June Calloway lived in the building on the corner, the one with the rusted gate that never closed all the way. Her apartment was on the top floor, but she spent most of her time behind the building, near the dumpsters, sitting cross-legged on a broken milk crate with a stack of napkins under her skirt to keep the filth off. While the other kids chalked hopscotch or screamed in the wind with sticky fingers, Zadie talked to food. Not just any food. Rotten food. Forgotten food. The kind that's been thrown away and left to rot in a place that never fully cools. She had a notebook duct-taped around the edges called the Book of Remembering. The cover had peeling Lisa Frank stickers, and inside were messy crayon drawings, pots of soup with eyes, chicken legs with tears, half-eaten birthday cakes with bandages. People said Zadie was weird, but people didn't know what Zadie knew. That afternoon, she crouched beside the open dumpster like she was waiting for a sermon. The scent was sharp: hot milk, burnt onion, spoiled meat. She didn't flinch. She was used to the stench. In her hand, a mold-flecked chicken leg, barely held together by sinew and cartilage. "Tell me," she whispered, her voice feather-light but serious. "You remember, don't you?" She closed her eyes. Waited. There was no thunder, no glowing aura, just the gentle crackle of an old transistor radio nearby, leaking soft gospel into the alley. Then a voice. Soft, male, broken. "He's still paralyzed because the leftovers are still bleeding." Zadie blinked. Not because she was scared. She never was. But because she recognized something in the tone. Regret. Panic. A secret too big to stay buried. She pressed the chicken bone to her ear and nodded like she was listening to the final verse of a song. "I see," she said, and gently placed the bone into a small paper bag lined with foil. She walked back upstairs to apartment 4C without a word. Her mama, Ms. Lottie, was knocked out cold on the couch, mouth open, one slipper missing. Zadie tiptoed past, careful not to wake her. She'd just come back from a double shift at the diner and needed the kind of sleep that came after you stopped dreaming. Zadie went to her room, closed the door, and locked it. Her bed was a pile of donated blankets on top of milk crates. A single cracked lamp flickered in the corner. She opened the Book of Remembering and flipped to a blank page. She didn't write. She drew. A large house. Fancy. Gated. The kind of place where the grass doesn't even grow wild. A long driveway. A man in a wheelchair. His eyes wide with guilt, fear, something heavy. A table. Food stacked like a banquet. And behind him shadows. Mouths. Leftovers with teeth. She circled a date at the top of the page. June 3rd. Under it, in a careful, blocky script, she wrote, "He's still paralyzed because the leftovers are still bleeding." She stared at the drawing. Whatever this man had done, whatever he'd buried, he didn't do it alone. The food remembered. The food always did. And now so did she. That night, she lay in bed, listening to the sound of her neighbor's TV through the wall. Some talk show hosts yelled something about money, betrayal, secrets. The usual. But Zadie didn't sleep. She lay still, blinking at the ceiling. Because the chicken had whispered something else. Something it didn't want to say at first. She's the only one who can collect the debt. And Zadie knew that someone somewhere owed something real big. And she was going to go get it. She clutched the Book of Remembering to her chest. And whispered back to the shadows, "I'm coming." The air changed the moment Zadie stepped out of the bus and onto Ridgefield Lane, a street so clean it looked like rain came with a butler. The sidewalks sparkled like they'd been scrubbed with toothpaste. The hedges were trimmed into suspicious perfection, like they were hiding something behind their green smiles. Zadie stood still for a moment, her eyes fixed on the iron gates at the end of the road. Beyond them sat a mansion that didn't belong in the real world. It was enormous, cold, white stone that gleamed like bleach bones. Long, cathedral-style windows. A front lawn so perfect it looked fake. Like if you pressed your finger into the grass, it would squeak. She gripped the handle of her broken pink suitcase, the wheel squealing every few steps. Her hoodie was too big, her socks didn't match, and her hair had that beautiful messiness only a child who didn't care about mirrors could carry with pride. She walked straight to the gate. A camera above her buzzed to life. She looked up and waved. "Hi, I'm here to fix something." There was no answer. The gate didn't move. So she waited. Exactly 6 minutes later, a tall white man in a Navy uniform, security, stormed out from behind a hidden alcove. "Hey, you can't be here. Turn around." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded napkin. On it, a drawing of the mansion. In the window, a man in a chair. "I'm here for him," she said softly. "He's broken." The guard hesitated, caught off guard by the calm confidence of a child who clearly had no business being there. She took a step forward. "Back. Off. The property." She stared up at him and said, "Tell him she brought something he left behind." That gave him pause. She dropped the napkin on the grass and turned around like she didn't care whether she got in or not. He watched her go. 3 hours later, Zadie was inside. How she got in is a mystery Griffin Malloran would never solve. All he knew was that the girl was suddenly there, standing his marble foyer, dripping rainwater, dragging that sad pink suitcase behind her like it had secrets inside. He stared at her from his wheelchair. Griffin Malloran, 58 years old, inventor of half the tracking software your phone never told you about. He made billions selling security. Ironically, no one felt safe around him. He was pale and stone-faced, with sharp, intelligent eyes that used to look down on the world from stages and boardrooms. Now they stared up from a chair he couldn't escape. "You've got 3 seconds," he said, his voice like cut glass. "Tell me what the hell you're doing in my house." Zadie took one breath, then said, like she practiced it, "I'm here to help you walk again." Griffin was shocked. Then he laughed. Not a real laugh, more like a cough dipped in sarcasm. "You? What are you? A fairy? A priest? A neurologist from a land of broken suitcases?" "I'm not a doctor," she said. "I'm a cleaner." He arched an eyebrow. "A cleaner? Not of your house," she said. "Of what you left behind." He narrowed his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, kid." Zadie tilted her head, calm as ever. "You're the one who's been sitting in that chair for 8 years. And no matter how much money you throw at it, you're still stuck. I came to help you clean up your leftovers." He rolled back an inch. "Security," he barked toward the hallway. "Get this lunatic out of here." But before the guards came rushing in, Zadie reached into her suitcase. Not with fear, with purpose. She pulled out a small, greasy brown paper bag and placed it carefully on the floor in front of him. Then she looked him dead in the eye. "Don't open it now. Open it tonight. When it's quiet. When nobody's watching." "Security," he started again. But she was already gone. She ran down the hall like a shadow, slipping between cracks. By the time the guard arrived, there was nothing to escort out. Just a bag, sitting quietly by his foot. That night, long after the lights were out and the halls emptied, Griffin sat alone in his study. He stared at the bag for 15 minutes before touching it. Inside was a single, half-burnt dinner roll. The moment he saw it, something inside him twisted. It wasn't just any roll. It was from a meal he had shared with his mother on the night she died. He hadn't seen one like it in years. A strange, homemade clover roll she used to bake only on Christmas, even though it had been June. It still had a faint scorched smell. Like guilt. Like memory. He dropped the bag and backed his chair away. Because he remembered something else. The last thing his mother had said to him before she collapsed. "Don't throw that away, Griff. Some things come back when they spoil." He looked toward the door. But the girl was nowhere in sight. Yet somehow, the house no longer felt empty. Griffin didn't sleep much anymore. Even before the chair, sleep had always felt like a dangerous luxury. When you ran a multi-billion-dollar empire and had enemies that smiled over steak dinners, shutting your eyes too long was like leaving the front door open in a war zone. But lately, it wasn't the fear of sabotage that kept him awake. It was the memory of a half-burnt dinner roll. It sat now in a sealed Ziploc bag on the mantel, like a museum piece or evidence in a case no one else was investigating. His staff didn't ask. No one dared. But since the girl left, something had shifted in the house. The air felt heavier. The walls creaked a little louder at night. And then, she came back. It was 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Griffin had just finished a virtual board meeting. His mood was acidic, his tone clipped, and he just sent 2 execs into early retirement with a few scathing words. He rolled into the sitting room for some quiet and stopped cold. There she was, sitting on his velvet chaise lounge like it belonged to her. Hoodie zipped halfway, that beat-up pink suitcase tucked beside her like a faithful dog. Barefoot. Zadie. Same calm eyes. Same irritating stillness. You again, Griffin said, swallowing down the pulse in his throat. Security's fired, clearly. She didn't move. You opened the bag. I did. And you remembered. I remember a lot of things I'd rather forget. She stood, walked up to him. Close. Too close. He should have called someone. He should have yelled. Instead, he stared at her like she was a puzzle he didn't want to solve, but couldn't stop looking at. I told you, she said softly. I'm here to help you walk. He scoffed. You got a scalpel in that suitcase. She didn't answer, just reached out and gently took his right hand. He froze. Her hand was small, warm, too real. Do you remember the roast beef sandwich from February 2nd, 1996? His eyes narrowed. What? You ate it on your jet. Private flight from Zurich. You had it flown in from a deli in New York. You were angry. You yelled at the pilot. Told your assistant to cancel the engagement. Griffin's mouth went dry. That sandwich was the last thing you ate before your fiancé left you. You threw half of it in the sink. Told your assistant you didn't like the mustard. She paused. You like the mustard. How the hell do you know that? Zadie kept going, like a medium tuning in to something unseen. The chili your ex-wife made in October, the week before the settlement meeting. You poured it down the drain. His heart thudded. He hadn't told anyone about that. The plate of oysters on the balcony of the Four Seasons, the night you bribed the senator. Griffin yanked his hand back. Enough. But Zadie didn't flinch. Each one of those meals remembers. They hold pieces of what you couldn't finish. Secrets you thought you could swallow. She leaned in. They're not gone. They're rotting. Inside you. Around you. You sound insane. Maybe. But your spine still doesn't work, and your soul's rusting. The silence hung like fog. Then she said it, simple, quiet, deadly clear. You can't heal unless you tell the truth to the food. He stared at her, shaking his head. Get out. But even as he said it, something inside him twisted. Because a part of him, deep, dark, well hidden, believed her. Zadie nodded once, then turned to leave. Before she walked out, she glanced over her shoulder. You'll see tonight. It's starting to thaw. That night, Griffin had a dream. He was back in his kitchen, only it wasn't his anymore. It was infinite, endless, cold, a maze of refrigerators with no doors. Each fridge humming softly, each one calling his name. He opened one. Inside, plates of food, dishes from every moment of his life. A grilled cheese from when he was 6, a glass of red wine from his first betrayal, a Thanksgiving turkey that oozed green goo, and then a scream. From inside the meatloaf. He tried to back away, but his feet were stuck. The floor turned to liquid. Leftovers swam around his knees. Then his waist. Then his chest. He gasped, reached for anything. Sank. Griffin woke up choking, sweating, panicked. And then he felt something, a tingle, in his toes. He blinked, looked down at his feet, moved them, just slightly, just enough. He didn't know if it was real. Didn't know if he was hallucinating, but it was there, and somewhere deep inside the mansion, he swore he heard the faintest whisper. Told you. By Wednesday morning, Zadie was living in the east wing of the mansion. No one asked questions, not because they didn't care, but because Griffin made it clear that questions were not welcome. When Melinda, the head of household staff, caught a glimpse of Zadie trailing behind him barefoot with that pink suitcase, Griffin said only, she's my niece. Distant side of the family. Trauma stuff. Let be. He delivered the lie like a man, used to twisting truth into something palatable. His tone was sharp, his face unreadable. That was enough to keep the staff quiet. But they whispered. Of course they did. They whispered because the girl was odd. Because Griffin had changed. Zadie moved through the estate like she'd been born there. She didn't marvel at the gold leaf ceilings or Italian marble or the custom Steinway in the parlor. No, she wandered through it like a forensic ghost hunter, pausing to stare at the wrong things. A cracked salt shaker, a rotted fruit bowl, a wine cellar with a humidity problem. She spoke to them, literally. Griffin once caught her standing in the kitchen pantry, whispering softly to a forgotten jar of marinara sauce from 1997. "It was a night you wanted to forget," she said, as if reciting a poem. "So you shoved it in here, next to the cinnamon. Told yourself it didn't matter. But it does." Griffin watched her from the doorway. "Are you done casting spells on my groceries?" She smiled at him. "That was never marinara. That was a confession. You just didn't open it." Then the tasks began. Not instructions, rituals. Every evening, she would call him into the kitchen or dining hall or wine room and hand him something grotesque wrapped in plastic, preserved like a science experiment. "This one's from August 2004, she said one night, placing a small charred steak on a ceramic plate in front of him. "You remember it?" He didn't even need to close his eyes. The memory crashed in immediately. It was the night he made partner. The steak had been overcooked, and he'd screamed at the waiter, made the poor man cry. Later, he justified it by saying he was under pressure. That success had a price. Now, the steak sat in front of him, burnt to hell, gray on the edges, still radiating guilt. "Eat it," Zadie said gently. Griffin stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "That's probably radioactive." She didn't budge. He chewed slowly, reluctantly. His jaw tightened with each bite. It was like swallowing charcoal in shame. When it was over, he wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin, and then, suddenly, his left pinky finger twitched. He looked at it, stunned. "Was that?" Zadie nodded. "They remember. And when you make peace with them, they forgive." The next night, she gave him a preserved lemon from the fridge, one he didn't even know existed. She told him to crush it with his fist, no gloves, no napkin, no silver spoon. The moment the lemon burst, its juice ran through his fingers and something shifted in his wrist. For the first time in months, he flexed his hand. He didn't ask questions anymore. But then came the warning. They were in the wine cellar. Zadie stood near an ancient shelf of spoiled Merlot bottles, running her hand across a dusty label like it was skin. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low. Griffin, seated in his chair with a glass of water, watched her. "I've been helping you taste regret," she continued. "Chew on lies. Digest moments you spit out too quickly." He nodded, sensing the shift in her energy. But she paused, eyes narrowing. "The worst leftovers aren't in your kitchen." He tilted his head. "They're in your basement." The sentence didn't come as a surprise. Not really, because deep beneath the house, buried in silence and concrete, was a room Griffin hadn't entered in 15 years. His father's office. That night, long after the staff had gone to bed, Griffin made his way downstairs. Zadie didn't come with him. She simply handed him a small flashlight and whispered, "You'll know it when you see it. But don't open anything unless you're ready." The basement door creaked like a warning. The air was thick. Dust clung to the walls like old sins. He rolled past old furniture, wine crates, locked trunks, and finally came to the back wall. There it was. A file cabinet, sealed shut with duct tape. Yellowed. Faded. Labeled only with a thick black marker. D.G. Dorian Griffin. His father. Griffin stared at it, every part of him cold. His hand, which had just begun regaining movement, clenched involuntarily. He could almost hear Zadie's voice again. "The worst leftovers are in your basement." And somehow, he knew whatever was inside that cabinet was still alive. The file cabinet stayed closed. For now. Griffin couldn't bring himself to peel the duct tape off his father's secrets. Not yet. But something had been set in motion. Like a bloodhound catching scent, the questions came rushing in, one after the other. And the loudest one refused to go quiet. "The night you were paralyzed, what really happened?" It started with a memory. Griffin was in the garden, watching Zadie hum to a rosemary bush she had insisted was grieving. The air smelled like wild mint and old roses. "Zadie," he said suddenly. "That night. The one when I collapsed. My birthday." She didn't look at him, just plucked a brittle leaf and rubbed it between her fingers. "I know. He swallowed hard. Everyone told me it was an aneurysm. Bad genetics. Random luck. Zadie finally turned to face him. Her eyes were too calm. Too certain. It wasn't luck, she said. It was a betrayal. Griffin's breath caught. You were poisoned, she continued. Not all poisons kill fast. So drag it out. Turn your body into a cage. Silence fell over the garden like a winter coat. Poisoned by who? Zadie stepped closer and whispered. That's the part your body still remembers. The food. The night. The taste. You just haven't listened yet. Later that evening, Griffin stared out over the vast lawn from the solarium. Rain tapped gently on glass. His mind was racing. His mother had been out of the country that night. His assistant was new. But Theo, his younger brother, had been there. Right there at the head of the table, making toasts. Pouring drinks. Laughing a little too loud. Theo had taken over the company just 3 days after Griffin collapsed. Griffin tried to push the thought away, but it stuck like gum in his throat. The next morning, Zadie summoned him to the dining room. The long mahogany table was set for one. Steam rose from a silver platter. A blindfold sat beside it. Griffin eyed both suspiciously. What is this? Russian roulette with soup? Zadie ignored the sarcasm. Put on. Reluctantly, he tied the cloth around his head. He heard her lift the lid. The smell hit him like a punch. Spice goat, roasted plantains, bitter greens. His mother's recipe. This is your family's New Year's meal, Zadie said softly. You haven't eaten it since the night you collapsed. Griffin clenched his fists. I don't need a guilt trip. You need to remember, she said. She fed him one spoonful at a time. The flavors hit differently blind, sharper, crueler, unfiltered. He chewed slowly, cautiously. Then it started. A flash, Theo leaning over him, grinning. Another. The family dog barking wildly in the kitchen, ignored. Another. A champagne glass switching hands. Then a voice. His voice, slurred and panicked. What's happening to me? He gagged. Choked. Throw the blindfold off. Gasping. Zadie handed him a napkin. You're not choking on food. You're choking on memory. He tried to speak, but his lips were trembling. His eyes stung. I trusted him. Zadie knelt beside him. Sometimes the most toxic things are served with a smile. Poison doesn't always come in bottles. Sometimes it comes with birthday candles. He broke. Tears slid down his cheeks like they'd been waiting years for permission. He hadn't cried when the doctor said he'd never walk again. He hadn't cried when the board ousted him. Not when Theo locked him out of his own tech empire. But he cried now. And just as the sobs racked through him, it happened. His legs twitched. Both of them. Not a subtle flicker like before, but a violent, involuntary kick beneath the table. His eyes widened. Did you see that? Zadie didn't blink. The food is talking. Now your body's starting to scream. Later that night, alone in his room, Griffin stared at his legs. He moved his toes. Just slightly, but they moved. His mind spiraled. He remembered something else. A small, stupid detail. Who fed the dog that night? Their housekeeper had been off. The chef never handled the dog. But Theo had made a joke about it. He'd laughed and said, the mutt gets filet mignon tonight. I'm feeling generous. Griffin hadn't thought much of it then. But now it felt like a knife sliding between his ribs. He had trusted his brother with everything. And now his own body was telling him the truth. The poison didn't come from outside the house. It came from the table. Griffin was pacing in the study. He hadn't slept. His legs twitched all night, like his body was waking up faster than his mind could catch. He had movement. He had suspicion. But what he didn't have, still, was clarity. Zadie had cracked something open. But now she kept dancing in circles, speaking in riddles and roots and memories like they were ingredients in a stew only she knew how to stir. Griffin was done with games. He had something she couldn't ignore. Money. She was in the greenhouse again, barefoot in the soil, repotting basil. It was 10 a.m. and already 90 degrees. Sweat clung to her collarbone like a secret. Zadie, he said, rolling up in his chair. She didn't look up. Your hands are shaking. I'm offering you $10 million. She paused. Now she looked at him, eyes unreadable. 10 million, he repeated. Tax-free. Transferred to any account you name. Just tell me what you're really doing here. A leaf snapped off in her grip. She let it fall. Zadie stood and wiped her hands on her skirt, then said the kind of thing that made him feel like he was the child. "It's not about money," she said. "It's about what you fed and forgot." Griffin felt the sting. He wasn't sure if it was guilt or shame or that familiar ache of losing control. "You think I'm some corporate villain?" he asked. "I think you forgot who cooked your food, who swept your hallways, who watched your dog when you were too busy watching stock prices," she replied softly. "I think you lived in this house for 30 years and never looked behind your own refrigerator." He blinked. What's behind the... But she'd already walked away. By that evening, Zadie had made her first demand. "I need access to the basement kitchen," she said. Griffin frowned. "It's sealed off. No one uses it." "Exactly." He made the call. By the next morning, she was inside, flashlight in one hand, incense burning in the other. She didn't explain the incense. She never explained anything. Then she asked for access to the surveillance archives. The tapes from the night he collapsed. Then the dumbwaiter shaft. The wine cellar. The storm shelter under the north wing. Then the heirloom closet. Griffin hadn't even known that was a thing. His father had kept it bolted shut for decades. She picked the lock like it was a loose button. Inside were things he hadn't seen since childhood. A baby rattle. A yellowing wedding dress. A ceramic dog with a cracked tail. She stood in the closet for 2 hours. Didn't speak. Didn't blink. The staff started noticing. First, it was Chef Marco who snapped. He was in the middle of prepping duck confit when he stormed out, shouting in Spanish that the root woman keeps talking to the walls. She asked if the garlic remembered anything. He hissed at Griffin before quitting on the spot. "Garlic!" Others started whispering, saying the cameras in the west hallway glitched when Zadie passed, that she left jars open that no one had touched, that the mirrors in the guest wing were off. The house began to feel like it was holding its breath. Late one night, Griffin found her in the pantry. She was crouched beside a dusty box of emergency rations, old military-style cans no one had touched in a decade. He watched from the doorway, unseen. She picked up a dented can of peaches, expired, rusted, held it close, and whispered into it. He couldn't hear all of it, but he caught the last part. "There's one more lie you haven't swallowed." That line hit him in the chest like ice water. He moved his chair closer, his voice shaky. "Who are you talking to?" She didn't flinch, just looked over her shoulder. "The food," she said. Griffin ran a hand through his hair. "Zadie, please. I don't know what's real anymore." She stood and walked toward him, gently placing the can in his lap. "You were poisoned once," she said, her tone like silk over a blade. "But that's not what scares you." He looked at her, confused. "What scares you," she continued, "is that your brother wasn't the only one who fed you lies." Griffin opened his mouth to speak, but the house creaked suddenly, not like with settling, like something old shifting, like a memory waking up. And Griffin realized Zadie hadn't just come to uncover the truth. She had come to resurrect it. Griffin hadn't intended to go digging through old footage. He couldn't even remember what had triggered the impulse. Maybe it was the dream, that blurred, nauseating image of a little girl hiding under the casket canopy at his mother's funeral. Or maybe it was just a feeling that Zadie knew too much. Far too much. He hadn't told her about his mother. He never spoke about her. But Zadie had asked yesterday if he still lit candles in the chapel hallway. A hallway no one had entered since the funeral. A candle he used to light, only for his mother. So that night, Griffin wheeled himself into the private media room. He connected to the off-site archive servers, pulling up encrypted folders the estate hadn't touched in years. Drone footage, surveillance feeds, internal ceremony recordings. And there it was. May 17th, 2013. The day of his mother's funeral. He hit play. The screen flickered to life. A wide shot of the rose garden, draped in black bunting, white chairs arranged in solemn rows. His mother's casket glistened under soft spring rain. People wept. Cameras panned. And there, just off to the right, partially behind a hedge, a little black girl. No older than 4. Alone. Standing. Staring directly into the lens. Zadie. Toddler Zadie. Same soft eyes. Same defiant calm. He froze the frame. Zoomed. Enhanced. She wasn't fidgeting. Wasn't lost. She was present, watching, like she was waiting. Griffin sat in stunned silence, the room heavy with the glow of the screen. He scrolled through more clips, chasing her shadow through the years. At age 6, caught in a flash of background movement during his father's 70th birthday. At age 9, reflected in the ballroom mirror during his first IPO gala. But only in the reflection. She wasn't visible on the main floor, just in the glass. He checked again. Same spot, different angle. She was gone. The next morning, Griffin didn't say much. He couldn't. He kept playing their earlier conversations in his head, picking them apart, looking for clues, for logic, for reality. Was Zadie real? A woman? A memory? Or a guilt projection wrapped in flesh and folklore? He couldn't answer, but he could feel something shifting. His toes. And then, his ankle. For weeks now, movement had been flickering through his body like static, but that morning, it was different. Steady. Controlled. He stood. Wobbled. Then he reached for the crutches Zadie had left beside the greenhouse door days ago, long before he could even feel his calves. He took one step, then another. Later that afternoon, she found him practicing in the corridor near the music room, sweat slicking his back. He looked up, breathless, pride swelling in his chest like a storm cloud. She didn't congratulate him, just smiled, a knowing smile, like he had finally caught up to something she'd already seen. Griffin wiped his brow. What are you? Zadie didn't blink. What you needed? It didn't answer his question, but somehow it did. That evening, they sat in the study, golden hour leaking through the French windows. Griffin pulled a small black key from his shirt pocket, held it out to her. The safe deposit box, he said. Downtown. Level C. Zadie took it. Her fingers brushed his. For the first time, he noticed something. She wasn't cold, but she wasn't exactly warm either. Like holding a cup of tea that had been steaming 10 minutes ago. A fading warmth. A memory of heat. She held the key for a long moment. Looked at it like it carried more than numbers. Inside, he said, there's a drive. A ledger. Some things I never wanted seen. Her eyes met his. And now. He shrugged. Now, I don't know who I've been protecting. She nodded. Then stood. Tomorrow, Zadie said, turning toward the doorway. I make you dinner. She paused in the light, casting a shadow that didn't quite line up with her body. The last one. And with that, she disappeared down the hallway. Silent as steam. Soft as memory. Heavy with meaning. Griffin entered the dining room just after dusk. The chandelier above the table glowed gold, casting long, flickering shadows across a scene that looked like something pulled from a haunted fairy tale. A single chair sat at the head of a long oak table. It faced a spread of dozens of dishes, porcelain plates and crystal bowls, each one steaming, stacked, or chilling with meals he hadn't seen in years. What is this? He said, confused. Zadie stood at the far end of the table in silence. She wore white, crisp, ceremonial. Her eyes were darker than usual, deep wells reflecting firelight. You said you liked duck confit, she replied calmly, gesturing to a plate by his elbow. From that night in Bordeaux, right before you let Charles take the fall for the bribe. Griffin's jaw tightened. That's not. Zadie pointed to the chair. Sit. He hesitated. His body, though stronger, felt heavy. Not weak, just weighed down, like something spiritual was sitting on his shoulders. Still, he sat. The moment he did, she lifted the silver cloche from the next plate. Your father's lamb stew, she said softly. The last meal you shared before he died. Griffin reached for the spoon, but paused. Why are you doing this? She ignored the question. You accuse him of stealing from you. But it was you who moved the assets first. That's why he never spoke to you again. He flinched. She took a slow step forward, unveiling the next dish. A plate of tomato rice, scorched at the edges. Your housekeeper's daughter made this for you the night you took her idea and patented it. The noise-dampening fabric. Remember? His throat burned. I paid her, he whispered. You paid the company, Zadie said. Not her. She still works at a laundromat in Queens. He looked down at the spoon, shaking in his hand. Zadie placed a napkin in his lap. Eat. He took a bite of the lamb stew. It was perfectly seasoned. His father had always added cinnamon. A strange touch, one he had never liked. But tonight, it hit differently. The cinnamon made him gag. He pushed the plate away. Zadie wasn't finished. She pulled another dish close. A copper bowl filled with bright orange curry. His stomach turned before she even spoke. "You remember this one?" she said. "The night your half-brother overdosed." Griffin's eyes widened. "Don't. You told the press he was just a distant cousin. Buried him without a name. You were worried about investor confidence." He clutched his gut. Sweat broke across his temples. "No one knew," he muttered. "I did," Zadie said. She did. "Ooh, another dish." This time, a red velvet cupcake, topped with cracked white frosting. "You gave this to a girl on your birthday," she said softly. "A girl you never saw again. A girl who had your eyes." His breath caught. The memory surfaced like a corpse rising to the top of still water. 20 years ago. A film set. A brief affair with a costumer named Maeve. She walked away weeks later. He never followed up. Zadie placed the cupcake directly in front of him. "You had a daughter," she said. "She was born 7 months later." Griffin shook his head slowly. No. Maeve moved. She wrote to you," Zadie said. "Tried. Dozens of times. Your assistant intercepted every letter. You never opened them." His face crumpled. Why are you telling me this?" She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "You left her. Like leftovers." He felt the room spin. His chest tightened. Zadie reached in her pocket and placed something gently on the table. A photograph, folded at the corners. Worn. A child, maybe 8. A small black girl with his eyes. Laughing. Holding a broken ukulele. "I found her," Zadie said. "And she found me." He stared at the photo, mouth dry. His voice barely audible. "You?" Zadie nodded. "I'm the memory," she said slowly. "Your money couldn't buy back." The room fell into silence. A sacred, terrible silence. Griffin sat with the truth laid out like a final meal. Each bite a confession. Each dish a wound. And Zadie, the ghost of what he forgot. The daughter of what he abandoned. And the reckoning he never thought would come wearing a white dress and a soft voice. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, waiting for him to finish. Griffin's breath hitched. His hand trembled as it reached for the photo of the little girl. The one who'd been his, the one he never met. His heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the quiet clatter of silverware settling on the table. Then, without warning, he collapsed. His body crashed to the floor like a tower of secrets finally caving in. The chair tumbled backward. Plates clinked, spilled, shattered. Food, like secrets of his past, splattered across the polished floor. His chest heaved. His eyes rolled. Then came the voices. Disembodied, echoing, cruel. "You said we were partners. I trusted you. You took my idea and left me broke. You buried me without a name. You promised to call back. Dozens of them. From the spaces between walls. From a food. From a stillness in Zadie's face. Each voice like a pin to his skin, piercing deeper, dragging shame up from the pit of his stomach. He tried to scream, but only gurgled air. Zadie didn't flinch. She watched him crawl. Watched him claw at the hardwood like a man drowning in invisible water. Then, calmly, she stepped closer, heels clicking slow and deliberate like a countdown. She knelt beside him, her presence unervingly still. "You think pain is the worst thing a person can feel?" she asked. "No." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Oblivion is." He looked up at her with bloodshot eyes. "What do you want?" She pulled a phone from the pocket of her white dress. It was already lit. A single screen glowed. $25 million. Recipient. ZH Foundation for the Forgotten. Underneath. Confirm with blank. She held the phone inches from his face. "I told you. The cure wasn't free," she said. "Your body's healed, but your soul? Still rotting. And the cost is everything you once stole." His lip quivered. You want money?" She tilted her head. "I want memory. I want remorse. But you only understand value when it comes with a dollar sign." He looked at the screen. His thumbprint had already been scanned. It was all automated. All it needed now was a blink. One involuntary, human reflex, and everything he thought he owned would vanish into her hands. He coughed, choking on saliva, shaking. Please. I'm sorry. She didn't respond. Just held the phone steady. I gave you your life back, she said. Now give them theirs. His vision blurred. Sweat mixed with tears. The screen flickered in his sight. He fought to keep his eyes open, but guilt made them heavy. Every second he resisted, the voices got louder. Liar. Thief. Father. Coward. Griffin sobbed, voice cracking. What are you? Zadie leaned in, her breath warm and soft against his face. I'm what you left behind. She smiled. But you can call me what I've always been. She stood. Leftovers. He blinked. Confirmed. $25 million transferred. The room fell silent. His breathing slowed. The voices disappeared. All that remained was the glow of the phone screen. And Zadie, standing above him like a monument carved from everything he'd tried to bury. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and turned. Before walking away, she looked over her shoulder, her voice low, final. Leftovers never die. They just wait for you to rot too. And with that, she walked into the night. While Griffin lay on the cold floor, surrounded by plates, ghosts, and the sharp sting of a debt finally paid. The screen flashed once. Transfer successful. $25 million sent. A soft ding echoed like a judgment from some higher power. Griffin slumped back onto the floor. His chest rose and fell, heavy with something far deeper than fatigue. It was as if every sin, every stolen breath, every buried truth had just been exhaled. It was done. The empire he built on deception had just been sold back to the ghosts he'd ignored at full price. He looked up, and there she was, Zadie, standing in front of the long table like an altar priestess, surrounded by platters that held more than food, they held memory. Her fingers grazed the edge of the final dish, a small porcelain bowl, cream-colored, cracked at the corner like an old tooth. Inside, soft, golden pudding. The scent drifted through the room, warm and haunting. Vanilla, cinnamon, and a hint of lemon zest. It was unmistakable. His mother's pudding. His throat tightened. That pudding had once been his comfort. A reward after good grades. A promise after a scraped knee. A peace offering after the night his father vanished without a goodbye. He hadn't tasted it in decades. He hadn't even thought of it in years. And now here it was, the last course in a reckoning. Zadie dipped the spoon in, lifted it slowly, watched it glisten under the dim chandelier like liquid gold. Then she took a bite. Her eyes closed. Her shoulders relaxed. Not in relief, but in release. Like she had carried someone else's sorrow for too long, and now it had found its way home. She swallowed, then opened her eyes and looked at him. You've paid for the truth, she said. There was no malice in her tone, no satisfaction, no cruelty, just the truth. Simple, bare, inevitable. Griffin tried to sit up. What truth? He rasped. Zadie smiled, the kind of smile that hurts to see because you know it's the last. The kind you don't get to keep, she whispered. And then, she vanished. Not in smoke, not in a magic trick, not in some grand, supernatural spectacle. She was just gone. One blink, and the space where she stood was empty. No sound, no trace, no footstep, only the soft clatter of the spoon falling back into the bowl. Griffin stared, breathless. Was she ever real? Was this some psychological break? Some punishment from the universe? He turned toward the phone again. The transfer was still there. Time-stamped. Confirmed. Irrevocable. The money was gone. But so was the weight. Not all of it. Some debts never leave you. But enough that, for the first time in years, he felt something strange clawing its way into his chest. Not grief. Not guilt. Something quieter. Clarity. He looked around the room. Plates once full of memories were now cold and still. The air felt different, too. Not lighter, but honest. He stood up slowly, wobbling slightly, and walked toward the bowl of pudding. He sat in her chair, the one that had stayed empty all evening until now. He picked up the spoon, still warm from her touch. Took a bite. The flavor hit his tongue like a time machine. He was 7 again, feet dangling from the kitchen counter. His mother humming. The world simple. He closed his eyes, letting the sweetness sit there, not just on his tongue, but in his memory. When he opened them, he whispered to the empty room, "Thank you." He didn't know if he was speaking to Zadie or to the ghosts she brought with her. But somehow he knew they heard. And just like that, the final course was served. Not for the body, but for the truth. The morning light leaked through the stained glass window like forgiveness. Griffin stood at the edge of the cellar stairs, barefoot, still wearing the same shirt he nearly died in just hours ago. No crutches, no wheelchair, no trembling limbs. His spine, once brittle, felt like steel wrapped in redemption. Each step downward creaked underfoot like an old memory surfacing. Dust hung in the air, lazy and golden, catching the sunlight like glitter from a different decade. He hadn't been down here in years. The cellar smelled like old wood, mothballs, and forgotten wine. But there was something else now, something faint but familiar. Vanilla, his mother's pudding scent, still trailing him like a ghost. He moved slowly through the narrow space, running his fingers along the walls. Masonry, stone, then something soft, paper. A strange crack in the brick near the wine rack caught his eye. He knelt, reaching into the crevice. And there it was, a small, weather-worn child's notebook, its spiral spine rusted, its cover bent and smeared with fingerprints. The kind of notebook bought from a gas station shelf, covered in doodles, maybe tears. Griffin hesitated. His heart picked up pace. He flipped it open. The first few pages were drawings, crude crayon sketches of kitchens, herbs, hearts with stitches. Pages scrawled in a child's handwriting. Lists of ingredients that read like confessions. 1 tablespoon of rage, 3 teaspoons of silence, 1 broken promise. But it was the final page that made his lungs pause. How to Cook a Father's Guilt. The title hit like a slap and a hug at once. Below it, a list written with eerie precision. Preheat memory to 8 years ago. Take 1 abandoned child and marinate her in absence. Mix with silence, bitterness, and broken birthday candles. Add 2 cups of why didn't he stay? Let simmer in foster care. Garnish with whispers of who she could have been. Serve cold, unless he returns. His hand trembled. Taped beneath the recipe was a photograph, already yellowing at the edges, like time had tried to forget it. It was him, Griffin, holding a baby. A dark-eyed girl swaddled in a purple blanket, her tiny fist wrapped around the collar of his shirt. The date in the corner read, August 17th, 8 years ago. But it was the caption written beneath that stopped his breath. Don't throw away what you made, or she'll come find you. His throat clenched. The silence in the cellar grew thick, like it was listening. Zadie, was this her? Had that tiny, forgotten baby grown into the girl who shattered his fortune, revived his spine, and made him taste his own history 1 bitter dish at a time? He stumbled back and sat on a wooden crate, gripping the notebook like a lifeline. The weight of it all slammed into his chest. He had once held something so small and pure, and then let it go. He thought money would erase the stain. But guilt doesn't fade. It ferments. It becomes recipes passed through rage. It becomes spells baked into sweetness. It becomes her. Griffin didn't cry. He couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he reached in his back pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to his wire transfer confirmation. $25 million. Still gone. Still worth it. Then he opened his notes app and typed the words. Find her. He stared at the phrase for a long moment. Then typed something else. Say sorry. Mean it. Don't leave again. As he stood up, the notebook pressed to his chest like scripture. Griffin knew something had changed in him. This wasn't just the falling action of a twisted story. It was the beginning of one that just might, end in healing. But healing didn't come from herbs and magic. It came from remembering what you threw away and walking toward it,